Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Thank you for joining us in this beautiful Wednesday morning. My name is Teryluz Andreu, and I am a partner with Axialent. Today, we'll be having what promises to be a very interesting and real conversation that is relevant to all business and people leaders during this day and time. I am based out of beautiful Miami, Florida, and for those of you who don't know Axialent, Axialent is a global leader in culture transformation and leadership development. And for over 20 years, we have been helping clients around the world and helping individuals and teams really make the shifts that they need in order to connect with their true selves skillfully and at work and beyond. So this year, we're very excited because we are the official and exclusive sponsors of the fellowship, a wonderful 4-day culture masterclass that will be happening in Santa Fe, New Mexico, November 7th through the 10th. And the goal of the fellowship is to really help us help organizations build a captivating culture that employees refuse to leave and that clients enjoy. So with that in mind, we are facilitating a series of webinars to talk about how you can drive a culture through conscious leadership in your organizations. And culture is a theme that is becoming very relevant in terms of all the challenges that we've been facing, not only over the last 2 years, but as part of the business imperatives and the business challenges that we are looking at in this VUCA world. And what we know is that many organizations start this journey with very good intentions, and unfortunately, they may lose some steam. So today, I would like to welcome our special guest, Ginger Hardage. Hey, Ginger. She's the founder. Nice to have you. And Ginger is the founder of the fellowship and the former SVP of Culture and Communication at Southwest Airlines. And Ginger, I know today she's based out of Texas. And we know that for those of you that are here in the US or are following the news, today is a particularly hard day. So we really appreciate you being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Terry. I think it's a difficult day for anyone reading the news about what is going on in Uvalde, Texas with the school shooting. And just want to acknowledge that up front. Because I know so many of us are so distraught, but especially caring about the families who have been directly affected. And we just wanted to acknowledge that up front and know that we wanted to go on with our webinar today because you're so focused on your culture and your caring and your empathy that we wanted to carry on with that learning today with the families in mind as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ginger. And it is sadly, it illustrates what we are facing in terms of, what happens outside of our organizations also impacts what happens inside, and us as members of our communities also share a responsibility through the way that we lead and through the way that we bring ourselves to work genuinely and consciously, that we can hopefully also make a difference so these awful things don't happen again. So thank you for joining us. I know you also had a pretty hectic morning with some also weather situations happening in Texas. So talk about VUCA.
That's right.
Yeah. So Ginger, we're very happy to have you. And I'm really eager and excited to be talking to you on how we can unlock the potential of culture in our organizations. And you had quite a fantastic journey. And I would love to start by just learning a little bit more about how and why, you ended up with this great initiative of Unstoppable Cultures and what motivated you to work with companies on their culture journeys.
Well, great. Thank you, Terry. Yes. Well, my journey actually in my career actually started out with a communications focus. And So I've really focused on the companies that I was with before Southwest Airlines. I was focused on leading the internal and external communications for those organizations. And that's where I was primarily a spokesperson. And that's where I learned that brands, the way they behave on the inside, will find its way to the outside. And how important it is to work on, from a governance standpoint, from a culture standpoint, to be working on how your company behaves on the inside. Because as a spokesperson, I was in a particular company before that had a lot of issues, and I was presenting those issues to the news media. So when I hit Southwest Airlines in 1990, I knew, wow, this is a different place, one that really does, where the inside brand is almost even stronger than the outside brand. How much attention was being focused on employees to make sure they had the right level of training and could really act like owners in the organization. And so I knew I'd found my dream job in 1990 when I joined Southwest. And so again, in communications, and then our team started to snowball, and we were able to take on other areas of the company, anything from emergency response to public affairs and also culture. And because Southwest already had such a great culture under the direction of Herb Kelleher and Colleen Barrett. So we were just continued to not screw that up and carry it on and continue to expound upon that and build upon that brand from the inside out. So I ended up retiring from Southwest. And when I did, we had a team of 150 folks who were focused on all aspects in a coordinated manner of really promoting that internal and external seamless look from the inside to the outside.
Yeah, and I think, Ginger, what you're saying rings so true, because we've seen it, right? Especially now with social media, like all these very carefully crafted branding strategies can really blow up, right? With just one incident, one comment, or people just expressing how they really feel through different channels. So I think that now more than ever, it's kind of a call to action that we got to be authentic. You know, the way that the message that we put out, we just got to be authentic in terms of, is that really reflecting how we work on the inside, right? And go ahead.
Yeah, and Terry, I think what companies have realized is that, you know, in the past, maybe we had a smaller group of people crafting those messages. We need to make sure we're crafting those messages with a very wide lens and thinking about so many audiences. So I think companies are wising up to that. We still have to be fast in our response, but how are we making sure we're hearing from a lot of voices inside the organization?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it has democratized the building of the brand, right? Like before, it used to be very much top down, very carefully crafted, and now it can really come from anywhere. So, and every client, every interaction just can really define that. And I think that that's why I've been hearing from a lot of the clients that I work with around the world that they're really paying more attention. I think that plus the pandemic, in which, you know, it's been really put a lot of strain in organizations and the ways of working, as well as just retaining and attracting the talent that they need. Everything has kind of come into play, and really culture, which some people used to, I don't like to say this, but say soft stuff, right? Really has become more and more visible and important. And the boards are actually, you know, asking for leaders to really take care of it. But, you know, you led a pretty well-known with your peers at Southwest. You guys are a case study, right? Even throughout time, it has really it's kind of evergreen. It has really stand the ground, and we know that even with all the challenges that the airline industry has been facing during the pandemic, Southwest still thriving and moving forward, which is fantastic. So. But that's not the case in many other organizations, right? there's a lot of false starts. There's a lot of good intentions that probably kind of fall short. So, in your experience, what do you see are some of the common culprits, like the common issues that you see that make organization fall short?
Right. Well, thanks for that question, Terry. At Unstoppable Cultures, that's one of the things I wanted to do in my retirement phase, right?
Uh-huh.
Corporate world was be able to work with more organizations, and I've been able to work with hundreds of organizations now. And I think there are three themes that organizations that cause them not to get out of the outright with their culture endeavors. And the first one would be leadership not all being on the same page. I think it's very important if you're establishing a culture or trying to refurbish something that might have gone on in your culture, that your leadership team is solidified in how that's going to be presented. Because if there's any missteps between the leadership, people are going to see that and they're going to notice that. So I think it's very important that all of the leadership be consistent and agreed upon. The second thing I see, I guess this one is more prevalent, which is they really don't have the right processes in place or the right discipline in place. They may have a leadership may be aligned, they may have great messaging, they may have great programs, but they don't have enough processes to continue to communicate, to push it forward in terms of culture. They may not be focusing here. The general areas that I'm focusing on is communication and training. There's not enough repetition, and it takes a long time. So being ready to know that culture change isn't one and done, quick change. We put out our values. Here we go. It's a process, and you need to have that discipline to continue to repeat and repeat. And the third thing is insufficient employee involvement from the beginning. So if we aren't in tune with the point of view of our employees on anything we're trying to introduce or change, it's probably not going to be very successful. And my rule of thumb on that is involve employees, because it's any of us know this, it's very difficult to, or more difficult to criticize something that you were involved in creating. So those employees in creating the culture change.
Yeah, I think that creating that sense of ownership really has to go at every level, and I agree with you. I think senior leadership really has the task or the responsibility to set the north. Because they are probably the ones that have the overall strategy and how things should be looking like or evolving. But it is a shared responsibility, and also could be a shared joy. I think sometimes people focus so much on this as a big change and something kind of difficult or overwhelming. While it can I think it could be a joyous journey if we frame it the right way.
Oh, absolutely. Well, at Southwest Airlines, fun loving was one of our values. So we always were looking through that approach, as well as how are we going to have fun, and how are we going to approach this in a fun way.
Yeah, and I've seen that. When we are when you were talking, I was kind of recalling a model that we use many times with our clients and really resonates, makes a lot of sense. We call it the 4Ds in order to attain culture transformation. So like you mentioned, the first one is define, which is where do we want to go? And now I think that it's harder to say we're going to establish this super long-term vision in terms of this is where we're going to be in 10 years, but you can have aspirations in terms of where do you want kind of your ways of working to be. And that's, I think, a great opportunity to involve people in that dialogue. I don't know if you've seen this, but working with some of your clients, but many times that definition is very limited to, let's just do an assessment, let's just do a survey, and maybe talk to a few people, and that's kind of where the conversation ends, right? And I think that there could be some very creative ways in which people can be part of that conversation, still with the accountability and the responsibility being on senior leaders, but really making people part of the process. Did you recall any like fun ways in which you involved people at Southwest? I know you guys did a lot of different stuff, but I'm just curious, what kind of out of the box stuff that maybe people listening here to our webinar today can borrow or have as an inspiration?
Well, I wouldn't call this one out of the box, but I haven't seen a lot of companies go to this much effort. Well, one of the examples was when it was time to redesign the uniforms at Southwest Airlines, because that would be thousands of people in all different kinds of uniforms when you think about a pilot, a flight attendant, a mechanic. So wide range, and the employees, they applied to be on that committee to work on the changes. So some companies might have gone to supply chain, an executive committee, let's decide what they're going to look like, and then it would be out, and it could be done in 2 months, right? This took several months. It took a long time. And but the outcome was so much greater because the employees had so much pride in the fact that and that's very personal. What you wear every day is very personal. And having them be able to be part of designing it. And one of the examples, if you think about employees who work out on the ramp, they have to, which is out with the aircraft, they have to wear a safety jacket or reflective wear, and they design the reflective wear into their clothing. So if you're in Phoenix at 106 degrees in the summer, you don't have to have on a jacket. You can have it in lightweight reflective clothing. That's just one example, but that kind of ownership. And so the fun part is the fashion show that they had.
Tell me about that. That sounds awesome.
And allowing them was a complete ownership, and they ran the focus groups with the employees. They did it all the way to the fashion show to be able to show off the new uniforms.
That's great. That's such a great idea, and it's a, like you say, it's also a very powerful symbol, right? Like it's what people wear every day, and you're empowering them to have a big say on it, and then also be recognized for it. So that's a great example, and I think that's also a good example of that many times leading these journeys really require what I would call courage and being humble, right? Courage to let go and being humble to know that there may be better answers than the ones that you can come up with as a leader in an organization.
Right.
Yeah. So, going back to that 4D model in which define is the first one, it's kind of setting that north. The other 3Ds have to do a lot with leadership, which is demonstrate, like walking the talk. And we say here at Axialent that leaders cast a very long shadow, right? Leaders have a big impact because, it's multiplying, right? Like when people look at you, when you're an individual contributor, yes, you're interacting with a lot of people, you're interacting with your clients, but when you have the honor and the responsibility of being a leader, by default of your authority and your level in the organization, your people are going to be looking up to you. So you cast a very long shadow. And in certain situations, what we find is that some people don't get on board that quickly, right? Some people may not necessarily be able to kind of grasp or prioritize what's going on, or why are we doing this, or even let go what made me successful in the past. This culture is all about changing how we behave, how we work with each other. What have you found, or in your experience, what did you find that leaders struggle the most with when it comes to culture transformation and these kinds of processes?
Well, it depends on the organization, but one of the things I've seen from time to time is that even vice presidents sometimes don't understand and they may think that culture is somebody else's job.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders on a leadership team that think, oh, we've got the HR people, and they're going to lead the culture charge, or the CEO is going to lead the culture charge, and it has to be everyone's job. So I think that's one of the hardest things sometimes, is getting everyone on the leadership level understanding that culture change is part of their job, and if they're not living the values of that organization, it's going to become toxic.
Mm-hmm.
So in some cases, some leaders need to exit if they are not leading in a way that is living the values of the organization. And there's a book I'd love to plug. It's from a friend of mine, Al Como, and it's about change leadership, but he wrote it from the perspective of change the leadership. And I think it's very insightful in that sometimes leaders need to change their behavior before they're able to lead. And in his lots of examples about that. And one of the things, some of the behaviors I see leaders needing to change right away are their visibility. They're leading a culture change. How are they going to show up in all the various channels? I was interviewing a CEO recently talking about some prospective work, and I asked him, I said, how often do you communicate? And he said, oh, monthly. And I was like, then I'm glad I held it together, because I was like, oh, wow, that's not very much. So just how we're helping leaders realize how much they have to be out there, whether it's on, because our employees are looking at LinkedIn and they're looking at our internal channels, but they're also looking at all of our social channels. So what are leaders using all of those ways to communicate how we're behaving? So it's storytelling, and our storytelling allows our employees to see all the ways that they can go to serve our customers, all the ways that their behaviors can have an influence. So I think your question, the hardest thing is helping leaders see how involved they need to be in the process, and the breadth of communication that needs to go out about culture all the time. It's not a faucet. You can't turn it on and off. You can't talk about it on Friday and decide you're not going to talk about it on Tuesday. So how are they keeping consistent and talking about what's going on in the organization and how that relates back to the culture?
Yeah, I think that's very important, especially now, like you're mentioning, that people are just used to continuous flow of information, right? And when you don't have the information, just fill in the blanks.
We all do that.
Exactly. So it's not just dependent. People are not passive anymore either in terms of finding that information. They will find it. Yeah, we'll find it. And, in what you're mentioning about storytelling, it's such an important skill of leaders. And I think we should be doing more as organizations to really help our people, especially when we come from a more technical background. That may be something that may not come naturally to some of us. And that may be a little bit of a cliche, but it's true. And it is in a way that just touches not only the minds, but the hearts of people. And yeah, and that I think happens when the leader himself or herself can really connect to what we're really trying to do. And what I found, I don't know if you're finding this as well, is that, and this is something that one of my colleagues, Frank Cherney, he says all the time. He says that understanding is not the same as being able. We may understand something at a very rational level, but that doesn't mean we can do it, right? I think if not, we will all be super fit, exercising all the time, and be on eating healthy foods and doing what's best for society, right? And that's unfortunately that's not the case all the time. So allowing those spaces for self-reflection, if we have the luxury of hiring for culture, right? That some organizations are starting from scratch or are kind of, like you said, revamping their whole leadership and maybe workforce, that's something to really pay attention to. Like, who are you bringing into the mix? But when we have to also provide our people that are already inside the opportunity to change, um, it got to start with that self-reflection, right? That introspection of what is it that I need to do in order for me to be a better role model for what we're trying to do here. And I think that requires a shift at the be level, not just the doing level, right? And that's a hard one. That is a hard one to do. Um,
Southwest has a new CEO, Bob Jordan, and Bob has
uh-huh.
been with the company more than 30 years. And one of the things he's committed to doing is he's changing his calendar. That's one
Okay.
of and in his new role, his calendar is changing, and he is very intentionally being out there with employees. So I see him, I follow him on his different social channels. I'm no longer at Southwest, but I'm their biggest fan, following them.
Mm-hmm.
And he's out there all the time with employees, and that is a tradition he is carrying on from the previous CEOs, but he's being very intentional about trying to meet as many employees face to face. When you have, I think they probably have 50, 60,000 employees now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's a great example of how do you go beyond just saying the storytelling, but also the story doing, right? That it's so key to make these processes really credible. People really start getting the signal that things are changing. Eh, and I think we're also, I don't know if you've noticed this as well, but um, I think it's very challenging when you're trying to drive change at scale, right? Many times, what we see is that we are part of a bigger system. We may be part of a global company, or we may be part of a company with 50,000 employees, and we may be leading one business unit, but we don't have necessarily influence in terms of what happens in other parts of the business. So I'm curious, what have you seen? And I know in prior conversations you and I had, that you share with me that you've been working. Sometimes you work not necessarily with the kind of the CEO and the people that are overall trying to drive a big macro culture change, but sometimes it's the leader of research and development or the leader of sales that is really trying to do something different because they're identifying that the ways of working have to evolve. So what would you suggest to someone that is trying to drive some changes within their team or a particular department or unit?
Well, again, I'm being a bit repetitive, but you have to start with understanding the employee's point of view and
Mm-hmm.
what is the change that you're looking to make. I've seen one organization. One of the things that they were doing is they realize their frontline leaders, the importance of their frontline leaders. So not only from their surveying, but actually being out in the field and observing this, their leaders were so busy with paperwork that they couldn't spend enough time out leading with their employees. So
Mm-hmm.
that organization is taking some of that paperwork and sending it back to headquarters and taking it off the responsibility. They're supporting their leaders, their frontline leaders out in the field, and saying, you can take this off your to-do list. We're going to do this for you, and this will allow you more time. So sometimes it takes those types of structural or policy changes
Mm-hmm.
to in our organizations. So that's one of the things that I've seen that's worked.
Yeah, yeah. And I've seen too that, like anything, change can be viral, right? Like when sometimes a colleague of mine, Richie Hill, he says that sometimes people do the right thing for the wrong reasons, right? Like they may be seeing a team that is having a lot of success, where people are joyful, where people are enjoying what they're doing, where people are enjoying some of their flexibility, and they say we want some of that, where we're getting the results, and maybe others are struggling. Um, so there could be a way in which we can, if you don't have the support from the overall company, but we still have responsibility for our teams, that not everybody has to be on board in the train for the change to happen. You know, we can start, I think, experimenting and trying new things, like you're mentioning, to see that change is possible.
So for that leader who might be listening in today, that you have a department and you're have a department of 50 out of 500 in your organization, you can start that cultural revolution in your group. And one of the ways you do that is you give your employees, I like to call it freedom in a framework, freedom in their jobs, and watch the results, and you'll get noticed. And once you get noticed, you can, I have a feeling you'll be taking over other departments because you've gotten noticed to be such a great leader. So start with, if you're within an organization, you can start with your own department because you're the leader. You have that responsibility.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I love that idea of freedom. I think that was a pioneer concept in terms of the freedom within the framework. I know there's a lot of tech companies now, for example, that are using those same words actually to talk about how they want to empower people to do what's right, for the customer, to drive innovation, and still provide some guidelines, right? Some guardrails. For how to do things, but really empower people. And I've been working with a lot of clients that are trying to drive more agility, especially during the pandemic. They saw that they had some successes in terms of, you know, the changes that happened that never thought could happen, and they're like, oh, we want to capitalize on this. And suddenly they're finding themselves getting kind of back into their old ways, right? So it is interesting to bring some of those concepts of like freedom within the framework and empowering people and doing little experiments just to see that it can happen.
Yeah, so I hope I've explained it well enough to the audience, but we all have a particular framework of their jobs, but how are we allowing freedom to come in so that our employees can actually show their personalities for the reason we hired them? Too often, what we see is a framework. If you've ever been on a 1-800 call and you can tell they're on a script, they're on a framework, and they have no capacity to go beyond that and apply. If your problem isn't in their framework, you're out of luck, right? So how are we allowing our employees to have so much empowerment? How are we allowing them to act like owners? And having that kind of freedom to solve the customer's problem, to solve an internal peer problem, all the freedom to really act like owners and be satisfied in their job. That only leads to employee satisfaction.
Yeah, and I think it ties back to, Ginger, to what we were talking about before in terms of, for that to work, leaders really need to change, right? You really have to let go of control. Exactly. It's really letting go of the traditional ways in which we probably were leading before. That really requires that internal transformation, not only of our employees but also of us, as we interact and try to drive that change. So that is I'm curious to see if you have any, when you guys were working on that leadership transformation at Chick-fil-A, at Southwest, and I'm thinking of Chick-fil-A because I know it's another great story of success. But as you're working with that at Southwest, or any of the other clients that you're working with, what have you particularly seen that has really helped people make that shift?
Modeling that. So if you're trying, I encourage organizations to think about the pain points for their customers or their employees, and if it would require a policy change, having the courage to make that policy change inside their organization. If you know something is a bottleneck, you can continue to receive customer complaint after customer complaint. How can you solve that problem, change the policy, and then use storytelling to tell the stories of how employees went above and beyond. Yesterday, I was with a client and an organization I was speaking to in the automotive industry. And one of the things they do, if they need to get a clients dropped off their automobile to be worked on, they need to get that customer back home and they don't have a ride, they have permission to get an unlimited Uber to get back home. So, I mean, it's things like that, that kind of freedom that makes customers continue to return and talk about you and how it's repeated and repeated. So that's an example. I would encourage people to look at your policies where you continue to see pain points from either your employees or your customers, and how can you alter those, because those will make such a difference in your culture.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, you're mentioning certainly the behaviors, right? That the role model, but the importance also of the systems, right? Because we may have people doing the right thing, but if those people leave and the systems have not changed, people may revert back into doing the things they were doing in the past. So I think those two really need to go hand in hand, driving both the change in behavior and also what are those policies, those processes, those systems that they're like inertia, right? They just stay there because nobody has changed them. And do they really need to change and examine them through this new way that we want things to work? And then the storytelling, which shows all these powerful symbols, right, of how change can happen. It's super important. That's great. And, you know, probably you've seen this. I know I've seen this and I get these questions all the time, but sometimes people start on this journey because they really see the need. There's a lot of very big momentum and then things lose steam. The processes started with committees, you know, started with all these great initiatives, and then sometimes get kind of watered down. And I know I've seen that quite a bit, and actually have been part sometimes, mea culpa, of some efforts that also kind of were very well intended, but lost steam in the way, and other things got prioritized and kind of got put in the back burner. So if someone is
they're stuck and how unstuck, is that the question?
Exactly. So what do you do when you're stuck? When you think you've done everything you can and you don't see the change? What would you suggest?
Well, one of the things I suggest is a lot of times culture change and being stuck. You're in a meeting and everybody might, in most organizations that I've seen lately, since I've left Southwest in this area, they turn and look at the HR person and say, how are you going to get us unstuck? The healthiest organizations realize that culture is everyone's job, and it is not HR's job or communications job or CEO's job. It's a cross-purpose effort. So years ago at Southwest, we had a group called Best Place to Work, and it was a cross-section diversity and inclusion, HR, communications, and we worked on making sure we were the best place to work. And we would take those pain points and see if we could do something about them. It needs to be a cross-section of in our business operations, everyone working on it. And obviously, it needs to have technology involved. A lot of times technology is not brought in. One of the things I'm seeing in other organizations, they're not bringing technology in soon enough. And they are oftentimes might be what enables our solution. It might be a technology solution that empowers our employees in the future. So bringing in a cross-section of people to solve the problem and not at everything through an HR lens would be is one of the ways I think people get unstuck. And because what we're looking for is a return on culture. We always talk about return on investment. I'm talking about a return on culture that is going to empower employees to make sure that our business stays where it needs to stay. So you mentioned Chick-fil-A earlier. They're one of those, when you think about great cultures, they have a great culture, and how empowering they are for their employees. And boy, do they get you through the drive-in in a hurry, right? But they're also #1 in profitability in their category. So that is return on culture. When you realize you're removing the roadblocks, you're empowering your people, and your business puts you at #1 in your category.
Yeah. And I also like that idea a lot in terms of bringing people from the business, and everybody's in the business, right? But sometimes we use that nomenclature, like those terms, like the people in the business and people in support, but really bringing everybody together and trying to reignite those energies. I think that's a great idea. I think also what I found is that sometimes you got to pause to go fast, right? There's sometimes I've seen that, especially like you mentioned, when things get a little bit watered down and everything is just about communications or HR related things, and there's no other things happening, it's time to pause and really have some conversations about what's going on and see what do we need to shift or what do we need to change. I feel that's also complementary to what you're saying and trying to kind of bring people together again. So I want to encourage our people joining us. Thank you everyone for, if you have any questions for Ginger or for me, please put them on the chat. Our friend Diego will be checking in and channeling some of those. So if you have any particular questions and you want for us to share them in our last couple of minutes here together, please put them in the chat. And Ginger, while we see if we have any questions kind of coming in, I am curious. You know, we talked about unlocking the culture journey and unlocking the potential of culture transformation. It's both an organizational and individual process, right? It has to happen within us. It also happens at the organizational level. As you have gone through this journey of driving change at Southwest and also with your clients, how does these experiences have changed you? Are there any mindset shifts, anything that you needed to let go as you went through this process?
Wow. Oh, okay, you're testing me. You know, one of the things that actually did, it does, is take me back to my roots.
Okay.
And sometimes just focusing on the basics and on humanity is helpful. I grew up, my family operated a grocery store. And this was only until I was age 7. So these are all lessons I learned. So for you parents out there, our kids are watching, because these are lessons I learned 7 and under. And I observed my parents and all they did in terms of serving the customers. And so that everything I'm doing at Southwest and what I'm been able to do with other organizations was really about, again, enabling the employees. Saw my parents do that, enable the employees so they can serve the customers, and encouraging them. So I would encourage people to be not too prescriptive in letting people serve our organizations in the way that makes sense for them. And the other thing that has definitely changed me is at Southwest, we would go out as officers and directors of the organization and work in the operations, day in the field. Thanksgiving, right before Thanksgiving is one of the busiest times. We always did that. We'd go work in the airport. And one of the things I would do is push wheelchairs or queue people up to the ticket counter. And so I was, volunteering out at the airport, and I realized how often our employees are invisible to our customers. And so how it's changed me personally is I make sure that I pay so much attention to the people who provide services for us, whether it is someone in the grocery store, is someone at a gas station. I pay so much attention to thank them for their service, because I think so often people who are providing us services are invisible.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make sure it's my personal endeavor to make sure that everyone I encounter always knows that I see them and I appreciate them.
Yeah, that's very heartwarming, Ginger, and I think inspirational too, because we take them for granted many times, right? And I think in organizations as well, we focus so much on talking about the leaders, like these super powerful people, and they are, but really the people that are in a business like you're saying, the grocery in food business, grocery store business, restaurants, hotels, the people that really interact with the customers are the employees that are there, and these are people many times in minimum wage, right? And they're in minimum wage, right? Like minimum is not the people that are making thousands of or millions of dollars. It's the people that are making minimum wage that sometimes have to struggle to make ends meet, and they're trying to do their best. So that's quite a reflection there, an invitation for us to see how in our culture efforts we can really give them a voice and ensure that they're empowered to thrive as well. So one of the questions that I see here in the chat, and you mentioned one book already, but I think there's someone in here that asks if we have any recommendations in terms of potential books or articles that we will, for people that are interested in this journey, something that we would like to share. You mentioned one book, so I just want to make sure that it's Change the Leadership, right?
Yeah. It's on change management, and it's called Change the Management. It's by Al Como, Comeaux.
Okay.
That is a book I would recommend. I would look also. You mentioned Chick-fil-A. David Salyers from Chick-fil-A has a book, Remarkable. I would recommend that. I think Adam Grant, a lot of people listen to his podcast. I think anything because he's so practical. He's an organizational psychologist. I would recommend, I love his podcast. They're uplifting and fun and really well produced.
Yeah, I agree.
Adam Grant. What about you, Terry? What would you recommend?
Yeah. So I will recommend for people that want to drive this, like we were talking about, from the B level, not just by putting programs in, but also by trying to shift mindsets and people. I would recommend certainly the Conscious Business book by Fred Kaufman, which was the founder of Axialent. Great book, and very makes you really reflect in terms of how you can address some of the change processes in a different way. And the other one is actually a book from one of my colleagues, Frank Cherney. It's called Be the Change. So it's how you can be your own change experiment. So if you want to start there, those are great books that I would say give you a good baseline for driving change from that B level, not just the doing level. So those will be two good recommendations.
You made me think of Pat Lencioni. I think any of the books by Pat Lencioni, I'm a huge fan of his company, The Table Group, so I would recommend them as well. And it's a really good one if you are a department leader. He has one book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. If you're trying to solve some problems within your own team, it would be a great book to read together and address how you're going to approach some of your changes.
Yeah, that's a great book as well. I've used his framework. It's pretty good as well. And I will also, there's a lot of very good questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. But there was,
try.
Yeah, Yeah, but there's one in here that it's very interesting on how do you protect and encourage current culture during mergers and acquisitions? And I think that that's a very relevant and interesting question. We're not going to have the time to cover that in a lot of detail, but do you have any initial thoughts, Ginger, in your experience of
I
what
know
to do?
I know M&A is handled very differently in different organizations. At one point, I'll give you this example, when Southwest acquired an airline called AirTran, based out of Atlanta, quite a few years ago, one of the first things that we did, we needed all of those employees, and with the acquisition, we told them that everyone would have a job. They might have to relocate, but that everyone would have a job. And that definitely made a difference, because I think anytime people hear acquisition, they think I'm going to lose my job. So only if you can be truthful and know that that is going to be the case, that everyone will have a job, but you might have to relocate, but everyone will have a job. If you can say that, that makes a huge difference. If you cannot say that, then I think there are other ways you work on describing the process that you might be going through, and so that you're very clear on the process of what it's going to look like for forming the new organization. As much, any times of change or crisis, we have to up the communication. As we started out talking in the very beginning, people will make up their stories. So how are you giving access to people for answers during the merger and acquisition period, and be able to move very quickly in
Yeah.
getting people answers?
I think also a lot of the things that we discussed at the beginning in terms of how you define your culture has to be revisited, especially when it's a big organization that it's merging, or if this is a big change. Because I think what happens many times is that we just continue on default mode, and we just expect, if we're the acquirer, we expect the people that are coming into the company to really adapt to our ways of working, and we may lose a precious opportunity to really evolve some things in our culture that may need evolving anyway. There may be a very good reason why we acquired that company. So being very clear about what are the value drivers of the transaction. Are we acquiring it just because of a system, or are we acquiring it because of the people? It is going to be important. And also having a conscious conversation about it. I think many times this is an area that is skipped. We don't take the time to really get to know that group that is coming into the organization, understand what may be the differences, and what do we want to merge culture? Do we want to keep each culture separate and let them run in parallel, which sometimes makes sense? Or do we want to bring everybody together under one umbrella? And like you say, being very open and honest about what's going to happen, so people can make a decision whether they want to stay or go, right? And honoring that.
Yeah. So I'll just jump in. Mentoring. If you can do a buddy system where the companies can match up. Oftentimes there's an acquirer, a company acquiring, and someone who's been acquired. So if you can have the company that's acquiring select and have buddies with the new employees, that'll go a long way. And it can be random. It doesn't have to be peer-to-peer, level to level, but have someone that can be a lifeline for those new employees.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned as well before in terms of the visibility, many times in mergers and acquisitions, that's an area where people kind of go back into their offices, in their shells, because there's so many task forces and there's so many things happening that leaders are less visible at a time when they should be more visible, right? And taking the time to not only doing that in the first 90 days, but making it throughout can really make a big difference. And communicating and reiterating that makes I think it could make a big change. But so thank you, Ginger. There's a lot of very good questions. Thank you all for submitting your questions. Before we end, I think we're almost at the hour. I want to just do a quick recap in terms of some of the great things that we discussed, and also, Ginger, to see if you have any additional thoughts that we'd like to add. So I think that based on what we discussed, culture transformation is possible, but it requires intention and action, right? It's not only about wishful thinking. We really gotta activate it, and we can do that. I think we share some ideas in terms of how that can be done in a very good way. Storytelling, super key. Story doing has to go with the storytelling, and leaders role modeling. I think we've been talking about that for play a key role. So that part on defining, demonstrating, the 4Ds, defining, demonstrating, demanding, and delegating, super important in order to address that culture change, and also that not everything may go well, and I think that there's always an opportunity to pause, check what's going on, make sure you're involving the right people, and don't get discouraged. You can reignite it, and in order to re-energize those culture efforts in your organization. Ginger, any other words of wisdom or advice that you would like to share with our participants today?
Well, it's an invitation. I'd love to invite as many people as possible who could come to the fellowship because we go deep on the issue of culture. Everyone creates a roadmap. We know people are coming in from all different points and all different sizes of organizations. We've had large organizations from Amazon but also we have organizations that might only have 50 employees. They come in at very different points. Many of them share some of the same issues, and we help with that roadmap. So I'd like to meet as many of you as possible during that process.
Yeah, and we're super excited to be joining you at the fellowship in November. I also want to give the heads up to all of our participants. This is one of a series of webinars that we'll be doing. So stay tuned. Make sure to follow Ginger, to follow me, Teryluz Andreu, in LinkedIn, and also Axialent and the fellowship. We're going to be releasing a lot of very good content and information. There may be an upcoming summary of this call for all of you that want to share with other people in your organization. And also, you may be receiving a recording. I know there was one of those was one of the questions that we got in the chat, a recording so you can share with your colleague and your friends. So thank you, Ginger, for your time with us today. It was a lovely, joyful conversation. I love your energy, and we're really looking forward to partnering with you and the other culture icons in the fellowship in November.
Well, Terry, it's always fun. It's always fun to have our conversations. So enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.